Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be, hold on. Boom, we're pre-recorded today because the internet kind of sucks in the jungle, but we're going to be talking about Bitcoin and the rest of the altcoin season. Now, one of the big questions everyone's mind is thinking about of this, I am sure, is are we going to continue downwards or are we going to continue upwards? Now there's actually equal credibility for both possibilities right now, so what I've been doing is just watching the minutia. Now most people don't have the ability or the time to trade in the very short term like this, and I don't suggest most people do it, but what I find most highly entertaining is the relationship between the altcoin space as well as Bitcoin. I think that what we are seeing right now is currently like the birth of the new stock market, and one of the reasons why I spend so much time learning in this space is because I feel it will be valuable not just in the short term, but also over the next 5 years as we start to learn how this new ecosystem works. We can put on the table, we have never seen a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week market before, and that alone is such a huge jump from what we've had that paying attention and learning some of its nuances and subtleties has become my main priority. So if we dive over into the charts, we've got Bitcoin on the screen right now at the 15-minute. Now, the other day, we actually have been watching Bitcoin on the daily and the weekly chart with all of the Bear family members who are not new to this channel. One of the things that we thought was most interesting, again, with technical analysis, we're just looking at probabilities and possibilities. The easiest way to play this game is to learn how to be non-emotional. So we had seen, there's a few counter indicating lines here. Let's move back down, there we go, to the main of the volume. So there's a few ideas here that we're going through. Now for most people with the Fibonacci charts, there's a few different ways to do it. I like when you have massive big tweezers like this, especially because we're on the weekly candle. I usually cut things off, even at the bottom here. I'm actually a little bit lower than I should be. I go right through the middle of the bottom around $400 to $500 just so I get an easier pick of my Fibonacci sequence. And right there we saw the 0.786 line. Now I had mentioned in our previous videos that both the 618 and the 786 were huge lines of support and resistance. So with no doubt we touched the very top of that line and then came back and then starting to test the bottom areas of this chart. So we can see on my other screen over here, which you won't be able to see, but we can see in this screen is basically somewhere around $10,600 is where we actually found a lot of support. And again, that's right at the bottom of the 618, or also known as the golden mean of the Fibonacci itself. So what's important here is the question of if it's going to go higher. Well, I think what's a more intriguing in question is what happens when it goes higher, it comes back down or consolidates. So whether or not Bitcoin is going to go higher or lower, there's actually a way for me to make an earn off of it. So the last week we had been watching, well, Bitcoin ran up. So I'm going to do right now is I'm going to show you two charts. Now yesterday I actually took a fairly nice trade in a token called One, and also for the latter parts of the day in a token called Matic. I'm going to open up Matic here on the left side of the screen, and I'm going to put it on the 15-minute chart, and I'm also going to then do the same thing with Bitcoin here. I'm going to remove some of our target sequences just so things are a little clearer on the page. And then we're going to also go into the 15-minute chart on Bitcoin. So the reason why I think this is super imperative and what I found so enticing about this theology or whatever, I don't know, I almost want to call it theosophy because it's like part of my new religion for trading, is the relationship between these two. So, well, actually, you can find this in many tokens, but basically the idea here is that every time Bitcoin turns around, there's a relationship between the alternative digital asset space and the asset space of Bitcoin. And that Bitcoin's like a big boat, and when it moves, it leaves a wake that can sink other ships. So here you can see, if you're looking closely at the chart, we're actually on the left-hand screen right at the very bottom, but on the right-hand screen, we're showing the time frame right at the very top of Bitcoin. As Bitcoin made its first successive bounce down, we saw a 30% move in Matic on the left-hand side, followed by, and this was, backed up by a 15% downside on Bitcoin. So essentially what we saw was the leveraged downside through Matic with less risk. Overall, yesterday, Matic produced almost a 50% return at both of its highs at around 185 Satoshis. Mid-range, I actually caught most of this wave here for around 12%. I woke up a little late and I didn't want to stay in the trade while I was asleep. So again, what we're seeing is that even though Bitcoin posted a 23% downside, we saw the 50% upside versus Bitcoin in that same time. So this is what I found interesting, is that if I can do this quickly, as we did yesterday, all we have to do is pay attention to when Bitcoin is going to turn around, not when its exact peaks are. And for me, the conjecture of Bitcoin's price point right now has almost become null and void. I think one of the things we forgot to mention more repeatedly is that in the long term, the fundamental belief for us here is that Bitcoin is going to somewhere around 100,000 or $1 million, maybe even higher, could be tens of trillions, but let's stay at least somewhat moderately ridiculous. Let's just not go ridiculous, let's stay in like moderately ridiculous. So somewhere between 100,000 to $1 million is where I think Bitcoin could go. Over the short term, it could very easily and very quickly go to the $30,000 mark. So with that in mind, there are actually other times in this little sequence here where we saw big gains. So last time was when we consolidated around $9,000 on Bitcoin, and we saw Matic and Fetch, both in this category, do around 60% gains. So again, we had a very small downside, only 20% at Bitcoin's last consolidation area, followed then by a big upside in Seller. So let's take a look at some of the possibilities. Now, this is actually becoming more and more parabolic by the looks of it. The exact, I guess, the total curve line of this parabola is going to basically teach us as it goes where it's headed. It's not as, there we go, let's draw this a little more. It's not as malleable. See, even here, like look at, I'm trying to draw an arc curve to it without breaking the curve too much. Okay, so there's a very easy road to $20,000, I think, with this line here. Now, again, we're trying to get Bob Prechter on the show to talk about Elliott waves, because as we've seen in the past, an Elliott B wave could come as high as $21,000 before retracing back down to 8 or 9. Again, this would actually all be inside of a healthy market ecosystem. We're about to see a nice cross of the bear claw here on the daily as well, which just gives us more bullish signals. Again, I think for me, a real bullish case scenario is not just when we past the all-time high, but we're closing near 20 to 30,000. Because for me, and this is going to be a hard part for a lot of people to understand, is for me right now, if we're breaking out to 14 and 20,000, that's our breakout to $4,000 to $5,000 in 2017. So there's still, if we are going to continue upwards, a massive amount of room for upside potential in my mind after that. Now, again, the most important part that I'm starting to be more concerned about is not Bitcoin's price in general, just where it decides to turn around. So for instance, we were watching in the Private Bear Den. For all of those of you who are in the Private Bear Den, thank you. It's been such a wild ride the last week. But we were watching, and we literally watched Bitcoin's top turn down. I even tried to go on live, but the internet here in the jungle sucks, and lo and behold, I couldn't go live. But nonetheless, this drop here equaled big gains. For instance, we took some in Raven the night before, and then jumped in Seller and Matic in the morning after. Again, what was important for us here is that just you could see the weakness starting to sell, and as soon as we saw this weakness candle on the 15-minute, we basically exited, and it turned around sharp really fast. Like we saw, what was this? I mean, this candle dropped down almost 20% in less than an hour and 30 minutes. This is a monumental drop, and this is kind of what we'd expect from these large areas of resistance. Is anyone that was buying in around the bottom, anywhere between 3,000 to 6,000, if there's hundreds of millions of dollars that people have just doubled, they're going to take profits to some degree or another. And that's basically what I think we saw here. Now, whether or not we close above some of these areas on the 15-minute bear claw is, I think, extremely important. As you can see, we've actually had trouble getting above the 314 simple moving average. And we actually have, on the smaller scale of these ideas, a little bit of a tweezers pattern that's taking place right in the middle of the cloud here now as well. So I think a big part of the conjecture is not how high Bitcoin can go in the long term, because again, I'm going to say this very clearly. I think 100,000 to $1 million Bitcoin is very easily attainable. I'm concerned about trading the waves in between because I don't really care what the US dollar price is. I want to be able to acquire more Bitcoin. And as we've just showed, that when you're paying attention to Bitcoin's reverse price movements, you can use the other alternative assets as your leverage and play a little more safely. Anyways, we're gonna keep it at that. This is Teal with the Arcane Bear. Thank you guys for joining us today. Remember, if you like this content, give us the thumbs up. If you think we do a pretty horrible job, give us those thumbs down. If you have any questions, thoughts, or comments, please do leave those in the section down below. If you're new to the Bear family, hit that subscribe button. And if you'd like to join the private Bear Den because you are brave and willing to stick around this ecosystem for the next 5 to 10 years, it's a great way to give yourself the tools, the education, as well as the community to be able to execute on the decisions that you make when you decide to make them. This is Teal with the Arcane Bear. We're signing off for the rest of the day, and we'll see you guys on the other side. Thank you all for joining us so much. Hoorah!